Now, I'm very pleased to welcome Chris Redston, face-to-face author, back for the sixth in his excellent series of webinars for us at Cambridge. I'm sure you will know Chris by now, but just in case you haven't attended his previous webinars, Chris has been a teacher and coursebook writer for 25 years. He's taught in Turkey, Argentina, Italy, and the UK, and he's just completed the second edition of Face-to-Face with his co-author, Gilly Cunningham. Over to you, Chris.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I hope you're all having a good day wherever you are in the world. And as usual, there are people from all over the world joining us today. I've noticed someone who's just come to join us from India. Namaste, welcome to you. And from Argentina, where I used to live and work for 3 years, and from Italy, where I also used to work, in the States, and Spain and Poland, from Nottingham in the UK, and as usual, a big contingent from the Ukraine, who always seem to attend these webinars in great numbers. Welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining me today. Today we're looking at pronunciation, and I asked you these questions and got lots of very interesting answers from different countries. Some teachers were saying that they felt their students didn't really worry about the pronunciation at all. A couple of people from Greece were saying that, while others were saying that they were more concerned about the pronunciation. Someone teaching in the UK, perhaps because they're teaching in a country where they have to use it outside the classroom all the time, that they are much more concerned. That's interesting. One interesting comment from Irina saying that she actually worries more about their pronunciation than they do. But I guess that's our job, isn't it, to worry about their language development, even if they're not worried as much as we are. In terms of the sounds that are problematic for students, again, lots of interesting comments and lots of different sounds, and we'll come back to sounds a little bit later in the webinar. Firstly, though, as usual, just to give you an outline of what we're going to talk about today. Firstly, I'm going to look at why pronunciation is so important for students. Then having a look at individual sounds or phonemes and how we can approach teaching those in the classroom. Then looking at the problems of sound versus spelling, which is obviously a big issue with English. Then looking at connected speech and rhythm in sentences and questions. I'll be going through some of the basic principles of successful drilling, and then some tips on how to correct students' pronunciation effectively in the classroom. Then finally, some information on how students can improve their pronunciation outside class. And as usual, at the end, there should be time for your questions. Okay, so why is teaching pronunciation so important, even if your students aren't maybe that concerned, as some of you have been saying? Well, in my experience, students often feel quite self-conscious about their accent and their pronunciation in general. And this is interesting because I think in my experience, they feel they're judged more on their accent and pronunciation than on their accuracy. If students make a grammatical error or use the wrong word, normally the listener can just say, okay, they mean this instead. Whereas if they have a difficult accent or make mistakes, then this can make students difficult to understand. And also, they maybe kind of feel that they are not putting themselves across properly, particularly with things like intonation mistakes. Most listeners don't think of intonation as a mistake. They just think that this person is maybe a bit bored or rude or impatient or something. So I think it's important that doing pronunciation work in class certainly increases students' self-confidence and communicative ability. And the ability to do this kind of work in a safe environment of the classroom is really important in their development of pronunciation. So I think it's important to focus on pronunciation in every class. Not always doing a big exercise, but pronunciation should always be somewhere in the lesson, especially if you're teaching new language. And in Face-to-Face second edition, we've included drills for all the new language in each lesson, and they're integrated into the lesson, and we'll see later. So there are lots of drills of all the new grammar and real-world language. Also, we've got a new section called Help with Pronunciation, which we put at the end of the unit. And we'll look at some examples of those in a minute. The reason we put these pronunciation sections at the end of the unit is we got lots of comments from teachers about other books where the pronunciation section, for example, on vowel sounds or I versus E or diphthongs or whatever, was kind of right in the middle of the lesson. And if you've got a topic that you're following through, it kind of interrupts the topic. And maybe you know the kind of course book that does that kind of thing. So we put these as self-contained, freestanding activities at the end of the unit. So you can do them when you want. It doesn't have to break up the rest of the lesson. Okay, so one thing we were very keen on is how to help students with individual sounds. As you know, there are some phonemes in English that don't exist in other languages. And these are usually the ones students have the problem with. I remember as a learner when I was in Argentina and was going on holiday to Brazil, and I was trying to do beginner's Portuguese. And I found it was interesting how difficult I found some of the sounds that are in Portuguese, the owls and o's and all these kind of sounds at the back of the throat that we don't have in English, and I found, quite challenging to do. So I do appreciate that having phonemes that you don't have in your own language can be a real problem. So these need to be taught and practiced in class. And I think it's important to work on these problematic sounds very early on, start at beginner and elementary level. Because I think, it's very important that these sections work on sounds that are difficult for all nationalities. We did a lot of research before doing the second edition about which sounds people found the most difficult. And a lot of the ones you mentioned in the chat box earlier on, like the TH sound, versus or, the H that gets missed off, particularly with Italian students, etc., are all there in our Help with Pronunciation section. So these, there's a Help with Pronunciation section in each unit at this level, and these work on the sounds that are difficult for all nationalities. Also, we often need to show students how to make these new sounds. It's often not enough just to keep saying it to them. We have to show them what they need to do to produce a sound, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Also, don't forget to tell students which sounds are the same too. Many of the sounds are probably the same in both languages. And as with things like grammar structures, I think it's very useful to say, this is pronounced the same as in your language. Normally a T, for example, is pronounced much the same in most languages. So, this is an example of one of these new Help with Pronunciation sections. And I've picked one, very simple one from starter level to show you how the whole Help with Pronunciation strand we've added to the course works. This one works on the two problem sounds of and or. And again, I noticed Irina mentioned that this was a problem for her students in the earlier chat. So in order to, we have a very simple system here. Firstly, we ask students to look at the pictures, listen to the sounds and words, and listen again and practice. And don't forget, this is starter. So here is what they will hear. So, very simple presentation of the sound, and then a keyword with the sound included in it. And I'm sure you have students who always say burger rather than burger. So this is teaching the very low level of beginners how to say the sound correctly. The second activity is they have to listen to these words and then notice how we say the pink and the blue letters. So again, they listen to the recording would go or, 40, or, sport, etc. So it's a very simple drill. And then finally, we ask them to listen and practice these sentences where they would use the pronunciation they've just learnt in the context of a sentence, recycling all the vocabulary. So this one would sound like this. Okay, so you can see it's a very simple system of presentation and then very word-based practice, then sentence-based practice. So very easy to use in class. Teachers don't really need to do any preparation. You just have to make sure you have the right audio CD. And as you may have noticed on that last drill that I played, we have already built in pauses in the recording for the students to practice the sentence. So you don't have to keep pausing the CD in order to do the drill. You just play it and the students say the sentence again in the gaps. Okay, as we were talking before, this is what happens if the students can't make an or sound. They just don't know what to do. Well, I've done lots of teacher training, and what often seems to happen is teachers would just keep saying the sound to them. They know it's or. But I think in order to really help students make these new sounds, we have to show them what's happening inside the mouth. And English, as indeed any other language, is a delicate and intricate ballet going on in the mouth between three moving parts. It's your tongue, your lips, and your jaw. So every sound requires those three elements to be in a particular place or move in a particular way. And then, of course, some sounds require the voice box to be turned on, your vocal cords to be turned on. So I think it's really important that we show students what's actually happening in the mouth so that they can understand how to make the sound. Here's an example. This is from the teacher's book, which of course is written for teachers, not for students, of course. So this is kind of for you to work out how to make the sound. So for the or sound, for example, we can point out that the lips are very rounded and pushed forward. The front of the tongue is down, and the jaw is also down. And also you can point out that or is a long sound. And I think that's absolutely fine if you've got a low-level class, a monolingual class, to explain how the mouth works for a new sound in their own language. You know, I think that's absolutely fine. Here is the same information for the sound. And we can highlight that when we make the sound, the mouth is slightly open and the lips, tongue and jaw are in a relaxed position. And notice this is exactly the same mouth position we use for the schwa. except is long and is a short sound. So if you've done the schwa, you can say it's the same mouth position, but just continue. Okay, here's another example with a problem sound that, apologies for the pronunciation, but Faradine in the earlier set was a problem for his students too, the sh, ch, and j sounds. And again, we go through the same kind of system here. First, we ask them to listen to the sounds of words, then listen again and practice. So the recording would go sh, shopping, finish, Turkish, with gaps for students to repeat, ch, cheap, wash, children, watch, sorry, and j, Germany, Japan, sausages. Then we would ask the students to match the letters in bold in these words to the sounds in one. So English is obviously sh, cheese is number 2, the ch sound, jam is number 3. So this is elementary, so we're testing them a bit more so they can work out the pronunciation. And finally, we ask them to listen to these sentences and practice them, and then take turns to say the sentences. So this is again using all the words and sounds that you've done earlier in a sentence to increase the challenge. And again, we would use teacher's book to help the teacher understand what happens in the mouth when you're making these sounds. So first we would need to point out that we make the ch sound by you place the tongue on the top of the mouth behind the teeth, and then move the tongue down to release air. And this is unvoiced. And the j sound is exactly the same mouth position. The only difference is its voice. The voice box is turned on. So if you wanted to demonstrate that in class, you could ask the students to hold the throats, their own throats, not each other's. When you go j, you can hear it, you can feel it vibrate with your fingers. And when you go ch, you don't feel any vibration. So I think to show them how to make the sound, they're much more likely to be able to produce new sounds. Of course, this throws up the problem of sounds versus spelling because, as you know, English isn't a phonetic language. So a lot of words don't sound how they're spelled. And not surprising that this is very confusing for students, particularly if their first language is a phonetic language, like Spanish, for example. So in Spanish, the letter O is always pronounced the same. In English, definitely not. So that's very problematic for students. So how can we help them with this? Well, firstly, we need to increase students' awareness of what are the most common sounds for each letter. It's also helpful to teach students useful sound and spelling rules, if there are any. Sometimes there's a useful spelling rule which matches a sound. Sometimes there isn't. But if there are useful spelling rules, now we're trying to teach them in face-to-face to give students some sort of basis for deciding how you pronounce the sounds. And again, we focus on sound spelling and help with pronunciation sections in all levels of face-to-face. Okay, and here are some examples. Okay, the first one I'm going to look at is the letter G, which has two main pronunciations. There's G, as in game, give, good, etc., and J, as in gym, strange, energy, etc. So the students would listen to those, and then they would they'd listen to those and practice them as a drill. Then we'd ask them to work in pairs and match the letter G in these words with the sounds 1 or 2 in one, in exercise 1. So gorilla is, of course, sound number 1, agency, sound number 2, etc. Then they listen and check. But as you'll see in B there, we give them a little spelling rule. So how do you usually say the letter G before E and Y and other letters? And they can easily work out before E and Y, it's pronounced J, and before other letters it's pronounced G. So a little spelling rule that will help them when they're trying to pronounce new words. Then after that, we put in something on a very common ending, which is very commonly mispronounced, the AGE ending, which is usually pronounced IDGE in English. And this is, I don't know about you, but this is one of those endings that students never seem to pick up because it doesn't look like it should pronounce like that. So we've done a bit of practice on those, like message, luggage, language, village, sausage, and manage. And then students are asked to work in pairs and take turns to say these sentences. I particularly like sentence number 4. So again, shows the help with pronunciation is focusing on one letter and showing them the 2 different sounds and giving them a rule of which sound you use in which type of spelling. Okay, here's another example, and it's interesting. We did quite a lot of work on word endings because we found in our analysis that quite a lot of students had problems with word endings. And actually, getting the ending of words wrong was one of the main reasons why students sounded more foreign than many other things. But often the ending kind of really stuck in people's minds. Okay, that's wrong. Another very common one, and this is one that became used to drive me crazy when I was teaching, is ATE. So here are the we ask the students to listen and notice the 2 ways we say ATE at the end of words. Okay, I'll just play that for you now. Okay, so then we ask students to work out how do we usually say ATE at the end of verbs and at the end of nouns and adjectives. And of course, they can easily work out that at the end of verbs, ATE is pronounced ate. But at the end of nouns and adjectives, it's pronounced ut. And this ut sound is something students find very hard to instinctively do. So by teaching them a rule, hopefully, we can help them with this problem. Okay, then we ask them to work in pairs and match the way we say ate at the end of these words to the sound 1 or 2 in 1A. So I'd like you just for a second or 2 on your own, look at those words and decide if they're sound 1 or sound 2. Also, just read the tip. Okay, so that awareness raising exercise would really help students to work out when they say 8 and when they say X. And then, of course, we give them some sentences to practice. And so hopefully now students will say, I get a certificate from my intermediate English class, not I get a certificate from my intermediate English class, which is what my students always used to say. Okay, moving on then. This is another one that causes problems with the letters OR, or. And as you'll see, there are 3 ways we say the letters OR. There's OR, as in organised mourning of divorce, the schwa, as in forget, opportunity, stubborn, and as in worse, world, workaholic. So we ask the students to look at the words in 1A again and decide how we say the letters OR when the syllable is stressed, when the syllable is not stressed, and after the letter W. So again, we're teaching them a spelling rule to go with the sounds. And I'm sure you have worked out by now that when the syllable is stressed, we pronounce OR as OR. When it's not stressed, we pronounce it as a schwa. And after the letter W, we pronounce it So, armed with that spelling rule, students can then do the next exercise where they have to match the letters OR in these words to the sounds. So, correct is 2, is a schwa. Worse is 3, because it follows the letter W. Enormous is 1, because OR is stressed. So students would work through those, and then they would obviously check on the recording, then play again, and then practice it. So again, we're helping students with spelling and sound by showing them the 3 sounds, teaching them a simple spelling rule, then giving them lots of practice. And finally, of course, they would take turns to give them a lot more practice for saying it in sentences. And we can see the gorilla is in sentence number 2 this time. Okay, and finally, here's another one, which is an area that students often have problems with, is OUGH. And there are lots of different ways to pronounce that. Unfortunately here, there's no real spelling rule at all. So what we've done is picked out 6 most common pronunciations of OUGH, which is OR, O, OW, OO, and OH. And we ask students to match the words in B to the sounds in the table. So again, I thought you would like to have a go at this, so I'll give you 20 seconds or so to have a look at B and put the words in the correct spaces in the table. And to just point out something that will help you is there's 1 line in the table for each word. So, or sort, there are 5 words that match with that. So I'll just give you 20 seconds or so to have a go at that yourself, then we can listen and check. So that checks the answers with the students, and then they can move on to the practice. So they've done the listen and check, then they get new sentences, and they practice saying these in pairs, which of course recycles all the stuff that we had before, like I thought we had brought enough stuff, etc. So again, this very simple help with pronunciation presents the language, tests students on what they know, and gives them practice. And just to answer one question that's come in, the help with pronunciation sections I've been showing you are from different levels. This one is actually from intermediate. Earlier ones have been from pre-intermediate and elementary. So apologies for not saying what level they're from. I shall try and make sure I do so for the rest of the presentation. Okay, so that's looking at sounds and spelling, and we do lots of extra work on that in the new edition. But also, don't forget, connected speech and natural rhythm is very important in terms of pronunciation too, to make sure that students say sentences and questions in a natural way. So whenever we teach new grammar or real-world language, by which I mean functional or situational language in face-to-face, we always include a drill on a class audio CD with examples of this language. These drills are immediately after the grammar or real-world section, where we deal with meaning and form, or they're just before the controlled speaking practice. As we mentioned before, the recordings have built-in pauses, so you can just play them straight through without stopping. You don't have to keep pausing for the students to drill. And we use standard British English versions of these sentences, including all the natural sentence stress, linking, weak forms, etc. So it's very important that the model for these are natural spoken English. They're not slowed down or over-enunciated. And of course, there are some help with pronunciation sections that focus on connected speech at the end of the units as well. Okay, here's just an example of where the drills are. For example, here is a drill for the past continuous. This is from pre-intermediate. You'll see exercise 2 deals with the meaning of the past continuous, and then 2B is the form, and exercise 3 is the pronunciation. And here we have a drill which we've done as a chain drill, which is basically you take a long sentence, break it down, and then build it up to the full sentence. So the drill would go, traveling back from China. I was traveling back from China. I was traveling back from China, and we met on the plane. So this kind of chain drill system works very well for longer sentences, like these tense-based sentences or conditionals of reported speech, etc. We use that a lot in the book. So you can see the drill comes straight after the grammar information. Here's an example of the drill where, firstly, this is from Starter. The students have to do a gap fill with filling in with do or don't and an infinitive. As you can tell, they've just done present simple questions. So do you go out a lot in the week? Yes, we do. Do you visit your parents at the weekend? Yes, I do, etc. And so first they do the gap fill, then we ask them to listen and check, then listen again and practice. And even at this level, we include the weak forms of Dieu and the sentence stress. So the drill would be, do you go out a lot in the week? Yes, we do, etc. So this shows that sometimes we have the drill straight after the gap fill and immediately before they do the speaking practice, where they work in pairs and take turns to answer the questions. And because it's right before where they do the speaking, they're really prepared on how to say the sentences in a natural way. And in the back of the student's book, we have the answers, and we have the drill with the sentence stress on as well. And quite often you can ask the students to follow the sentence stress while they're listening and practicing. And here's an example of one of the help with pronunciation activities we do on connected speech. This is dealing with these extra linking sounds that link up words that end in a vowel and begin with another vowel. If you know the course or you were attending the listening webinar, you'll know we do quite a lot on getting students to understand linking, both consonant vowel linking and these extra linking sounds. So here we're taking it one step further and asking them to produce these sounds. So first we get them to notice the sound, then they listen again and practice. Okay, so that gives them reminds them of the three different extra linking sounds that we use. Then we ask them to listen to these conversations and notice the sounds, and then listen again and practice. Okay, so this kind of linking, which makes it sound much more natural, may come naturally to your students, but for a lot of languages this doesn't happen automatically. And so this is the kind of activity that will really help your students sound much more like a native speaker. Here's another example here, where we ask students to practice for strong and weak forms of words. So the first thing we want to do is to remind them of how we say the strong and weak forms of these words. For example, do, you, at, for, etc. So they'll listen and practice those. Then we give them a conversation. They're going to listen to this conversation and circle the words in pink that they hear in their strong forms. So I thought this would be a good one to try with you as well. So I'm going to play the conversation. Try not to circle the words in pink on your computer screen, but you can just go through and pick out which words do you hear in their strong forms. Okay, so you can also check your answers, or you could ask your students to check the answers by looking at the recording script in the back of the student's book, where the pink words are the weak forms and the blue words are the strong forms. And I'm sure you worked out that the strong forms are used when they're at the end of a sentence, like which company do you work for, or in short answers like yes, I do. So this highlights this grammar point and also gives them practice in saying these in a natural way, because of course the final stage is they role play this conversation in pairs and try and make sure the pronunciation of weak forms are correct. So we're really taking students a step further and making them work on particular activities that improve their pronunciation of this phonological feature. Okay, so as you've seen, a lot of this involves drilling, and of course a lot of pronunciation work in the class involves drilling. And so I thought I'd summarize some of what I feel are the principles for successful drilling. A key point is I think it's important to drill the new language after you've dealt with meaning and form, not before. Sometimes I've seen people drilling sentences that students don't know what they mean, or words they don't know what they mean. And from a learner point of view, that's very hard for students to cope with. So meaning and form first, then pronunciation. And if you have a pre-recorded drill on the class audio CD, like on face-to-face and most other courses, then I suggest you use it. That's what they're there for. And as I've pointed out, the drills in face-to-face have the correct gaps, so you don't have to keep pausing the recording. Of course, sometimes you might, just for a change, or because you can't use a CD, or you're doing your own presentation, you might want to model the language yourself. If you do, I think it's important you say the word, phrase, or sentence 2 or 3 times at normal speed first, and include natural stress, linking, and weak forms. So it's often a very natural tendency to try and slow it down or over-enunciate it, as though you're helping your students. But in fact, you're really helping your students if you say it in a normal speed in a natural way, because that's what you want them to achieve. And as we've seen before with the past continuous, try and use chain drills for longer sentences or questions. So, won the lottery. If you won the lottery, what would you do if you won the lottery? You know, break it down like that. I'd always start with a choral drill, which is the whole class saying it together, and then drill students individually. Choral drills give students a chance to give it a go without too much focus on them, and give them a bit of confidence before you ask them to say it individually. And if you use the audio CD, you can do individual drills. You can just play the recordings again, and then pause after each sentence to allow all the students time to say the sentences. When you're doing individual drills, I'd always start with the strongest students, and importantly, drill around the class in random order. Try not to go in seat order as it gets a bit predictable. I think it's really nice to keep students on their toes when you're drilling them, so no one knows when they're going to be asked. So jump around the class in random order. Excuse me. Also, it's important to keep up the pace and get some energy in the room. There's nothing worse than a slow drill. And for vocabulary that doesn't look like how it sounds, a word like mortgage, I'd always try and drill the words to get them to say it before they see it written. And in terms of giving feedback, I'd praise students for good and comprehensible pronunciation, and make sure you acknowledge weak students' improvement, even if their pronunciation is not perfect. So also, your aim here is accuracy, so you should correct students when they make a mistake, and your students would expect to be corrected at this stage of the lesson. And we'll have a look at how to correct students a bit later in the webinar, i.e. now. Okay, how to correct students when you're doing a drill. I think the key thing is, the natural tendency I find for a lot of teachers is just to say the sentence correctly to them again. The problem with that is they don't usually know what they've got wrong or why you're repeating the sentence. So if all you do is keep repeating the sentence, students are going to just repeat it back with the same mistake. So I think try and resist that natural tendency to just repeat the correct sentence again. Instead, show students what or where the mistake is. So there are lots of ways you can do this depending on the type of mistake it is and the type of language you're working with. A very common thing is you say the sentence up to the mistake and then pause. So the students will know that the next word in the sentence is what they've got wrong. Or you can use your fingers to highlight words, like count the words on your fingers and then stop on the finger that has the word that is wrong. Also using keywords like tense, if they, if they're saying it in the past simple, not the present perfect, or preposition or weak form. So that will focus students on what particular mistake they're making. Or you can just pick out the problem word and focus on that if it's a vocabulary pronunciation problem. So like, no, it's not mortgage, it's mortgage. Say it again, mortgage, mortgage. If it's a problem with linking and rhythm and weak form, I found the easiest thing to do is just get them to say it faster, because that forces them to use the linking and weak forms in order to say it at a quicker speed. Or just drill the stress words if you've got a problem with linking and rhythm. Like, for example, a sentence like, you must have been waiting for ages. You could just drill, must wait age. Must wait age. You must have been waiting for ages. You must have been waiting for ages. So by just drilling the stress word, you encourage the students to squash all the other words together with the weak forms and elision, etc. that's needed. So highlight the mistake, and then I think it's important to get them to say it again. And if it's a particular sound they can't make, again, don't just say it back to them, show them the mouse position for that sound as we've discussed. So whatever the mistake, whether it's sound or linking or weak forms or the wrong stress, make sure you ask the students to say the word or sentence again. Absolutely crucial. Don't just say what's wrong and move on. And praise students for their effort, even if it's not perfect. I found you can get stuck with students trying to get things right. So I find like saying something like, oh, that's better, is a good way to move on when a student is struggling, even if it's not perfect. Because it makes the students feel their effort has been acknowledged, and you can move on to other students. And don't focus on one student for too long, as it can get a bit embarrassing in front of the class. And keep it light. Drilling should be fun. I used to really enjoy drilling in classes when I was working abroad. And if you can get that energy right, students really benefit from it too. Okay, just once you've done all this work in class, it's really good to encourage students to work on their pronunciation at home. And we put a lot of stuff on the face-to-face self-study DVD-ROM that they get in free in the back of the student's book to work on pronunciation. So if you haven't had a look at it, these are some of the things we have. We have the class audio drills of grammar and real-world language. So in the unit menu, look for the listen and practice exercise in orange. They'll be the same drills that you did in the class, so they can use them at home and practice on their own. And what's more, we have a record and compare facility, so students can record their version of the pronunciation, then play them both back and see how it compares with the model that is on the DVD-ROM. And that record and compare facility is really useful for students working on their own. We also have all the pronunciation of all new vocabulary, whether you're going in a vocabulary exercise or through the dictionary, just click on the little arrow to have the pronunciation. There are other extra pronunciation exercises which aren't in the student's book, and there's an interactive phonemic chart where they can click and practice all the sounds. So lots of stuff on the self-study DVD-ROM that it's worth telling your students about if they want to improve their pronunciation at home. Okay, so a final thought on pronunciation is I think most students are quite sensitive about their English pronunciation, particularly when they are staying in or visiting an English-speaking country. So I think it's one of the most useful things we can do in class is to help them improve in this area. And when they feel confident in their pronunciation, they become confident English speakers. So keep working on their pronunciation, and I'm sure your students will thank you for it. Probably. Okay, that's the end of today's talk, but just to remind you, we've now done 6 webinars on these topics. So we've done one on grammar, vocabulary, listening, speaking, functional language, and today's on pronunciation. And if you've missed any of these webinars, you can watch them on the Cambridge English YouTube channel, and you can catch up by via the Cambridge link as shown on the screen. So we've got time for questions now, but also I'd like to thank you for watching. And any questions that are coming my way?
Yep, quite a few questions come in. So first one from, let's have a look. First one from Rodolfo Mattiello, who asks, how do you normally deal with regional variations, e.g. British pronunciation against American pronunciation or Southern versus Northern pronunciation in the UK?
Very good question. I think as a general point, I think that it's important to only teach kind of one version of the pronunciation at a time. I think if you're trying to teach them all the different versions, they will get confused. And I think as a general point, you know, try and teach what you would say. If you're using a book like Face to Face, which is a British English course book, you will probably, if you use any of the drills, you'll be teaching the British pronunciation. And in fact, the differences aren't that great. The main differences between them are there are probably 7 or 8 different sounds, particularly vowel sounds, that are different, like hot and hot, and sounds like that. I think if your students are exposed to more American English and British English, when there's a word that is that has this difference, it may be useful to point it out. But I think if you drill too many versions, you'll probably confuse the students. As for regional versions in the UK, I would always go with a standard British English model if you can. If you're teaching in the UK, for example, if you're teaching in the north of England, or you're teaching in Scotland, you will probably teach some variations just so they can survive out in the real world. But otherwise, I'd kind of encourage your students to be fairly standard, because their version of a regional accent might not end up being like the real regional accent, and it might make them less easy to be understood.
Thanks. I would possibly answer Isabel's question there about whether it's safe to teach RP, received pronunciation, therefore.
Sorry, what's the question?
The question was, is it perhaps therefore safer to teach received pronunciation?
I think it is, yes. And I think students are much less aware of the differences in pronunciation than we are as teachers. Sometimes when I play a recording in class and I say, oh, where's that person from? And it's obviously an Australian accent or an American accent. Often they don't notice any difference, so because all they're doing is trying to understand it. So I would stick with an RP version. Obviously, if you are a native English speaker and have a particular accent, then you will need to explain, okay, this is a kind of standard way people say it. This is how people from where I am say it, so that they can understand you as well. But I would agree, I'll stick with an RP version if you can. but that is teaching something that will make them comprehensible to anyone they speak to.
Okay, thanks. We had a question just come up from a few people about the sort of how realistic we need to be in our expectations of students. I mean, can we realistically expect students to attain native levels of proficiency and pronunciation?
Yeah, good question. And I think it's unrealistic to expect your students to end up with a perfect native speaker accent. I think unless they live in a native speaker country for a long time, they're just never going to get that. And I think there's absolutely nothing wrong at all with having a national accent. You know, you're learning English in Spain, you speak English with a Spanish accent, that's fine. I think that's not anything that needs correcting. I think that's absolutely normal. So I think the main aim is to make people comprehensible. And if they have a Brazilian accent, Spanish accent, Portuguese accent, Japanese accent, that doesn't really matter. Everyone has an accent. I've got a standard British accent, and you know, everyone's going to have an accent. So I think that it's important not to make what you're aiming at too hard to achieve, but I think really you judge them on whether they're comprehensible or not. So don't feel you need. I try and make students feel good about their accents, because I like all the different accents that people speak English in, and I think they should not worry about having an accent. What they need to be is easy to understand.
Okay, thanks. Got a question from Lawrence Goldman, who asks whether, sorry, not Lawrence Goldman, a question from Yaroslav Lavrenchuk, who asks, when you're dealing with primary school students, is it okay to deal just with form and ignore meaning when you're drilling different sounds?
If you're drilling sounds, then you're not really dealing with meaning at all, are you? You're just dealing with individual phonemes. I think the principle that students always should be, if you're drilling words, then I think it's important you teach the meaning of the word before you drill them. And I'm sure that would naturally happen, whatever material you're using. If you're just teaching sound, you're just teaching sound. I think I don't think form really enters into it that much, but if you're teaching a simple structure like present simple sentence, I would certainly do the grammar, i.e. the form and the meaning, before I do the pronunciation.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll just squeeze in one final question, which will be from so many. Actually, just one quick question from Nurjan, who asks if the tips about drilling are included in the course books, the tips that you ran through.
Yeah, the tips about drilling are actually in the front of the teacher's book. Before you get to the teacher's notes on all the units, there's a 20-25 page section at the beginning of the teacher's book, which includes tips not only on drilling, but there's like 3 or 4 pages of teacher's tips on teaching vocabulary, teaching grammar, teaching listening, etc. as well. So have a look in the front of the teacher's book. And of course, if you wanted to look at anything on this screen again, you can always catch up on the YouTube channel and just go through to that section of the recording, and you can make any notes if you want as well. But they are basically all in the teacher's book as well, yeah.
Thanks. And one very quick final question from Marcia Baptista, who asks whether face-to-face is just British English or whether there's an American English edition.
There is currently, it's a British English course, so it teaches, as we've seen, it has British RP accents on the drills, and it does the standard British English grammar. Although actually there's not a huge amount of difference between British English and American English, apart from a few grammar structures and a few little bits of pronunciation. So, but basically, yes, it is based around British English, although a lot of the accents we use for recording, for listening activities, we use accents from American English and Australian and Irish and various other native speakers as well. But at its core, yes, it is a British English course. Because it's the best kind of English.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. So I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. So thank you very much, Chris, not just for this webinar, but for the previous 5 in the series as well. Together they've made an absolutely fascinating series of sets of advice and interesting ideas there for improving your teaching and getting your learners leveled up. So thank you very much for that. And as I mentioned, don't forget that all of these will be on our YouTube channel. If you'd like a certificate of attendance, you can email my colleague Kerry Start. And we've got a webinar coming up in 2 weeks' time on June the 24th, when Deirdre Safers is joining us for a webinar on engaging students in online activities. I'll post the link for that in the chat box right now. So thanks very much, everybody.
Okay, and thank you from me for everyone for tuning in to this and the other webinars. We're having a bit of a break for the summer, but hopefully there'll be some more webinars coming for you in the autumn, our autumn up here in the Northern Hemisphere. And finally, I hope you enjoy the World Cup and watch England beating Brazil in the final, which I'm very much looking forward to. And apart from that, enjoy the World Cup, have a great summer, or winter if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, and hopefully we'll be back here again in the autumn. Bye.
Great, thanks Chris, thanks everybody, bye.